Hello, Pittsburgh. I'm Zach Gibson, and this is TribLive's From the Newsroom podcast, bringing you top stories from TribLive.com. Today, we're exploring the budding world of urban farming with TribLive staff writer Julia Burdelski. We'll explore Ebony's inspiring journey from backyard gardening in Sheridan to her creation of 2 thriving community garden locations. We'll also uncover the importance of food access, education, and community connection in Pittsburgh's urban farming scene. Hi, Julia.
Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. So, to get started, tell me, what is an urban farmer?
Urban farmers are folks who are growing food in their communities. We're seeing them popping up throughout the city of Pittsburgh. So these aren't, the big farms that you see out in the country. These are smaller little farms that are nestled within urban environments, often in some of the city's more densely populated areas even. And these are folks who are growing food not just for themselves, but they're growing food for their communities. We see some parts of the city where there isn't a lot of fresh food access, and these are people who are trying to fill those gaps and bring food to their communities, and also in a lot of cases bring education and community spaces as well.
Okay. And one of these urban farmers is Ebony. Can you tell me a little bit about her?
Yes, Ebony Lunsford Evans is a urban farmer who is currently operating 2 farms, one in Sheridan and one in the city's north side. She started in 2017, just growing some food in a little garden in her backyard in Sheridan. She was a former teacher, and she found that a lot of local youth started to kind of flock to her yard. They wanted to learn more about how she was growing food. They wanted to see what she was producing. And she said it kind of became a de facto outdoor classroom. So eventually she was able to expand and get a site down the street from her home in Sheridan. And like I said, there's now a second site that she operates in the north side as well. And she is growing food that she uses not only to feed herself and her neighbors, but she also uses it to stock a corner store that she runs in Elliott. And she donates a lot of it as well. And she also has a kind of a teaching element where she brings people in, kids, adults, all kinds of people, and teaches them about what she's growing. She has a bunch of different crops, everything from pumpkins to peppers and everything in between. She even has chickens on the site. So she has all of the farm staples, but it's all kind of nestled within an urban environment where you really don't expect to see a farm.
All right. So, with many urban farms that have been budding in Pittsburgh's communities, could you tell me about what made Ebony sow this seed that led to her community gardens?
So Ebony told me that she realized that fresh food access was scarce in her community. She told me she grew up in an urban environment where she didn't have a lot of access to fresh food herself. One of the stories that she relayed was the fact that she didn't know what a Brussels sprout was until she was like 18 years old, and a friend pointed one out in a grocery store. And so she wanted to kind of change that and make sure that everyone in her own community had access to fresh food. Sheridan doesn't have a grocery store, and so for people who want to get fresh produce, it's a long walk, or they have to drive to another neighborhood or catch public transit, and so it's hard for people to have that access. And she was looking to change that and make sure that everyone had healthy fresh food options, and also that they knew where it was coming from and knew what kind of nutrients they could get out of these foods and better understand what they were eating.
This is also something that she enjoys with the educational aspect, being a former teacher, as you said in her introduction. How else has Ebony seen this grow since she's begun?
Yeah, so she has a lot of programming now where she's able to teach people, children and adults, and kind of help to bring better awareness around where food is grown. She said, for example, a lot of kids are surprised to learn that the eggs that they get at the grocery store come from chickens, like the chickens that she has on site. So she's doing a lot in terms of education, but also she's growing more and more food, like I mentioned earlier, going from a backyard garden to now 2 urban farms. And she opened her own store in Elliott, so she is now able to sell a lot of what she produces and some other basic staples to a community that doesn't have a lot of other choices to go to for food.
When we're reading your article, it becomes clear that urban gardens are more than just a food source. They're also a source of education and community engagement. Before we talk about those other benefits to this urban farms, can you describe for me the term food desert?
Absolutely. We hear a lot of people talk about food deserts throughout the city. These are neighborhoods where there isn't a lot of access to food generally, or specifically to fresh food. So there are some neighborhoods that don't have any grocery stores at all, and people have to have very long walks or even fairly long drives to be able to get any food. And in some neighborhoods, there might be a little convenience store that sells chips and ramen noodles, but still there's no access to fresh, healthy options. And that's where we're seeing a lot of these urban farms kind of come in and try to fill that void and try to take what currently is a food desert where food is really inaccessible and grow and produce for the community themselves.
Okay. Now, most people call them food deserts, as we mentioned, but for your research, you met and interviewed Rakid Bey, another manager of a farm. Bey refers to the phenomenon as food apartheid. Did Bey explain to you in their interview why they chose to refer to it that way?
Absolutely. So Bey refers to it as food apartheid because she believes that this is intentional and discriminatory lack of food access. So I think food desert sometimes kind of implies that it's just a naturally occurring, oh, there's just no food here. But folks like Bey see it as more of a systemic problem. A lot of places that lack food access, a lot of places that we would call food deserts, are also predominantly minority communities or are predominantly low-income communities. And she points to the fact that some of these communities have, for example, they don't have the right zoning to allow for folks to come in and build stores to fix that problem, or they've seen such historic disinvestment that nobody wants to come in and try to serve these communities. And so she's kind of acknowledging with the term food apartheid that she feels this is a systemic problem that has targeted communities that are most vulnerable. And of course, a lot of these communities that are lower income and don't have food access, the problem is kind of exacerbated for folks there because not only do they not have convenient food access, but these are also the people who are probably least likely to be able to afford a car, to be able to easily drive to other communities with food access, or they have the worst public transit infrastructure. So she's just kind of acknowledging in that terminology that there are several systems at play that kind of work against these communities and make it harder for them to have access to food that so many other communities takes for granted.
Bey's vehicle for combating this food inaccessibility is the Black Urban Gardeners and Farmers of Pittsburgh Cooperative. Can you tell me how that organization utilizes urban farming to educate, connect, and engage their communities?
Absolutely. So the cooperative has about a dozen members that they're all farmers and gardeners who come together and they share resources, they share knowledge, they talk to each other about what has worked and what hasn't worked and their own experiences, just to try to make that community stronger. And they try to encourage other people to take a stab at growing food themselves. They try to encourage people, whether they have any experience in farming and gardening, to come into that space. The cooperative really is aiming to make sure that food growing feels accessible for everyone, regardless of your race, your ethnicity, your income, wherever you're located. They're trying to make it a more inclusive space. So, for example, they operate a small urban farm in Homewood, and the folks there are willing to help other people better understand how they're growing the food that they're growing there. And they also give away most of the food that they grow there to try to directly impact that community and make sure that folks not only have access to food, but also access to knowledge about how they could potentially grow their own.
Okay. There are many different community farms in the Pittsburgh area, the Garfield Community Farm being one of these. Mm-hmm. This farm has also recognized the importance of positive community connection in a similar way to the previously mentioned organization. Can you tell me more about some of the ways that their garden has grown to serve their community members?
Absolutely. Garfield is a community that has been plagued with violence. It's a community that has seen disinvestment. And so acknowledging the fact that that's kind of a troubled community in some ways, they try to provide more than just food, but also a gathering space. And so, for example, they have like a little labyrinth there that sometimes serves as a place where they can host vigils after violence in the community. They've recently added some sensory spaces where you can relax and hear the sounds of nature and feel smooth rocks and smell fresh herbs. They have things like a little free library so local youth can come and have like a safe place to pick up some books and have positive interactions with the folks who farm and garden there. So I think that they are cognizant not only of the need for food, but also of the need for safe community gathering spaces. And they've tried to kind of cater to both by growing food in an environment where everyone is welcome to come in and to have a positive interaction with nature and green space in a community that doesn't have very much open green area.
And I've seen this echoed in your interviews with the farm's manager, AJ Monsma, where she said, in quote, "We're a community where there's a lot of trauma. As an urban farm in Garfield, we realized the need to have a focus on mental and behavioral health because of where we are." Also, from the production and distribution assistant, Mahogany Thaxton, who said, quote, "The space is really the best reflection of Garfield community members. It's an intersection of older Garfield residents, younger residents, more well-off, more working class residents, across race, age, and gender." Now, as you've highlighted, this is a theme that is consistent throughout a lot of the urban farms in Pittsburgh, the extra benefits that come along with just providing more accessible, healthy food. Obviously, the initiative to try and provide these spaces is a positive thing for Pittsburgh, but can you tell me, what is Pittsburgh doing to better support and cultivate the urban farming initiatives in its communities?
Yeah, so the city of Pittsburgh has started to provide some additional support for these folks. This year, they provided $25,000 in support for local farms, and they also recently launched a $3 million food justice fund, and some of that money is going to go out in grants that could potentially help some of these local urban farms and gardens. And they also have started, some city officials have started planting food-bearing trees that will produce fruit that will be free for folks in the community. Councilwoman Deb Gross, for example, has planted dozens and dozens of these trees throughout the communities that she represents since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Councilman Anthony Coghill in Beachview recently started an orchard there that he's hoping to expand to one day like 100 trees. I think right now it has about 30. So the city is trying to kind of build, I think, a little bit upon the efforts that are already underway and help support people who are already there, and also do a little bit of urban planting themselves.
Okay. So we see that we have budding farms. We have Pittsburgh trying to do what they can to combat food inaccessibility. And let's now turn to the effect on the communities themselves. Let's talk about community impact. Mm-hmm. Urban farms seem to be sprouting up on a national scale. Is there a growing want or need for this new demographic of green thumbs?
I think so. We spoke to Che Axum, who is the director of the Center of Urban Agriculture and Gardening Education at the University of the District of Columbia. And in his more national expertise, he mentioned that this is a trend that he's seeing across the country, where in recent years there has been more emphasis on growing food within the community in urban environments where food access has possibly, been kind of scarce in the past. And he pointed to food insecurity as a leading factor of this, as well as grocery store inflation, and said, as people are struggling to have access to fresh food or to afford fresh food, there has been an increased push towards growing food within the community to serve the community.
In your story, he says that he thinks there's been a food revolution going on for quite some time. Here in Pittsburgh, have you seen this growth of urban farms in this style of farming impact and transform lives and communities in Pittsburgh? Tell me a little bit about your interviews and visits with Hilltop Urban Farm.
So at Hilltop Urban Farm, they took the site of a former housing development in the city's St. Clair neighborhood, and they cleared it of thousands and thousands of pounds of rubble from the houses that had been torn down, and they have instead turned it into a community farm. And so they took something that was kind of an empty eyesore for the community and turned it into something really positive. It produces about 5,000 pounds of food per year, and they donate it to various local nonprofits. Most of it stays within just a few miles of the farm, which is really nice, I think, for that community to have food that is so connected with them locally. I was speaking to one of the nonprofits that receives the food, and they mentioned how important it is for that community to realize that that is food grown right in their backyards and how impactful that is for them. And it's not just about food, as with a lot of the other farms that we spoke to. It's also about education and giving local youth an opportunity to learn about how food is grown and to get out into green space and have those kind of opportunities that are so often missing in those urban environments.
Mm-hmm. And on that vein, you met and got to interview Zion Everett. Tell me a little bit about what he gets to do with Hilltop Farm.
So Zion was a local youth who just popped into the farm for a volunteer gig at one point, and he ended up getting a job there over the summer as an intern. He's from Mount Oliver, so again, kind of in an urban environment where there aren't a lot of farming opportunities, but he kind of took to it and really enjoyed the work there. The day that I met him, I think he was harvesting eggplants to donate to Abiding Missions. But that's just, one example of how local youth can connect with these urban farms and get opportunities to work and to learn more about food production and where their food comes from.
Okay. Now, obviously, starting and growing an urban farm takes some time. And this is part of the benefit of the farms themselves is the potential to last. Seeing this type of community engagement activity and resource grow over time is something that I'm sure everyone who starts these initiatives is hoping to see when they go into it. One such venture was the Friendship Garden in Tarentum. Can you tell me a little bit about your interview with the Reverend Philip Beck and their interesting outlook on removing borders for their farms and the longevity of the farms themselves?
Absolutely. So Reverend Beck has been operating this community garden in Tarentum for several years now. And what's really unique about this is it was the only farm that I visited that has absolutely no fences, absolutely no barriers of any type. So, a lot of farms have fences up to keep out unwanted animals at the very least, and also to sometimes, tell people that they're not able to access all the parts of the farm at any given time. But this garden has no barriers. It was really meant to serve the community. There are a lot of low income and senior housing developments nearby. And so people from those communities often stop by to grab food. It's just take what you need as you need it. There are no income requirements. You don't have to wait for a volunteer to be on site. People can just come in and take whatever they need. And Beck was saying that the whole point of the farm was to be a place where there are no fences and there are no barriers and everyone is welcome at all times. So he really prides himself on not putting up any fences there.
Through his interview, he says, in quote, "If we put a fence around here, we would undo the whole process of this garden, which is to provide an open space for folks." He continues to say, "We've created a space of what was just grass into something that feeds people, not only in body, but potentially in soul, in spirit. This place creates community and friendship." This is a theme that we see throughout most of the urban farms, and even more so in the Friendship Garden, this intention to positively impact the community. You also interviewed DJ Spencer, who said that it's an important function for the area, with food insecurity being so prevalent everywhere. Can you tell me a little bit more about food insecurity and the way that these farms and communities in Pittsburgh are starting to turn the tide on making food more accessible?
So in Tarentum, that's another community that does not have a grocery store. So for some people there, especially people who are older or don't have access to transportation, have a harder time getting around, this might be the easiest or only source of fresh food. And then at all of the urban farms throughout Pittsburgh that we talked to, they all popped up in places where there aren't a lot of options for fresh food within easy walking distance. It's not like you can walk out of your house in Homewood and pop into a fresh food market right down the block. These are places where fresh food access is currently and has historically been scarce. So these urban farmers that we talk to are providing often thousands of pounds of food every year to feed their neighbors and to feed vulnerable communities throughout the city. And like we mentioned, they're also building communities so that other people can come in and learn about how they could do similar things for themselves, how they could build community gardens of their own, or how they could grow a little bit of food for themselves in their backyard. So there's the old saying, you can give a man a fish or you can teach the man to fish. And these urban farms, I think, are really doing both. They're providing food, but they're also teaching people how to grow their own food. So they're providing food for people in the moment right here and now, but they're also, I think, laying the foundation for more people to be able to grow food on their own down the line.
Okay. Well, Julia, I want to thank you for your time and thank you for coming on to discuss the many sides of food inaccessibility and urban farms.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zach Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.